Now, please welcome to the podium Rob Henkin, President of the Wisconsin Policy Forum, to introduce today's speaker.
Thank you, President Leslie, and good afternoon, fellow Rotarians. Very nice to be with you this afternoon, and it is my pleasure to take this opportunity to introduce both today's topic and today's speaker. My guess is that most of you who are familiar with the Wisconsin Policy Forum know us best for our work on city, county, and school district budgets, or perhaps our work on education policy. But in recent years, some of you may not know, public safety research has emerged as a top priority for our organization. Back in 2020, in the wake of the George Floyd murder and nationwide protests, then Mayor Tom Barrett asked the forum to conduct an independent review of Milwaukee Police Department policies and procedures to determine how consistent they were with various police reform proposals being advocated across the country. Our report, which was released in June of 2021, found general consistency when it came to high-profile items like use of force, but, and I quote from our report, with regard to the less visible but increasingly scrutinized question of the appropriate role of police in the community, we found, and I quote again, early signs of progress, but opportunity to do more. In response to that finding and other important conversations taking place in our community, the Milwaukee Police Department decided to re-examine its policies and its protocols surrounding community-oriented policing. And that's a term that we will define for you in just a moment. As part of that effort, the department held more than a dozen community listening sessions across the city. They contracted with us to attend those sessions, document the points made by citizens, and match those up against best practices in community engagement observed in police departments in a series of peer cities. So here today to tell you what we found is Ari Brown, who has been a lead researcher in all of our recent work on public safety and policing. Ari, simply put, is a rock star in our organization. We hired him right out of the master's program at the UW-Madison La Follette School of Public Affairs in 2019 as a data and research analyst. Within months, he was promoted to full-fledged researcher and then shortly thereafter to his current position of senior research associate. So over the next half hour or so, you will see for yourself why his meteoric rise in our organization was justified and just how someone so young can have the word senior in his title. So ladies and gentlemen, please give a warm Rotary welcome to Ari Brown.
Thank you, Rob. That was very kind. And thank you all for having me today. I'm really excited to share some of our research. And I think what was one of the longest research projects that the forum has probably ever been a part of, but one that I think yielded a lot of interesting insights and is clearly relevant for anyone who lives in or cares about Milwaukee. So Common Ground is the title of our report. As Rob mentioned, this was a project that focused on 16 community listening sessions that were held around the city of Milwaukee, starting in the summer of 2022 and ending earlier this year. As Rob also mentioned, public safety is something that we've really taken a deeper look at over the course of the last couple of years. Rob mentioned taking stock our police reform report from 2021. We also last year published Under Pressure, which was a look at the justice system in Milwaukee County from the point of offenses and arrests to disposition in court, looking at all different sorts of metrics from 2018 to 2022 to see how things were functioning prior to COVID, during COVID, and in a post-pandemic world. We've also published a number of our shorter focus and taxpayer reports that look at individual issues of public safety, including things like budgets and government finance, kind of more in our wheelhouse. But as Rob mentioned, this project was focused around these listening sessions. You can see on the map up here that they covered the full scope of geographic diversity of the city, and included listening sessions in all sorts of different venues and with different residents showing up. The impetus for these listening sessions was based around the Collins settlement. For those who are unfamiliar, in 2018, there was a settlement that was reached with a number of plaintiffs surrounding alleged constitutional stop and frisk policies. There were a number of different items that were delineated in that agreement for the police department to work towards, as well as the Fire and Police Commission. A lot of those being more data focused and focused around stop and frisk practices in general. But there were a lot of other stipulations as well. Included in those stipulations were certain areas where there was a need to define community-oriented policing. Community-oriented policing, broadly construed, piloted kind of at the federal level as a term in the mid-1990s and has proliferated from there. It really, centers around the use of community partnerships and proactive policing to address conditions that give rise to public safety issues. It is predicated on a partnership in between the police department and residents of a community in a give and take relationship that's really critical, recognizing that the police department cannot and should not be responsible solely for solving all issues of public safety, and that for these issues to truly be alleviated, there needs to be a partnership and a give and take. So the real impetus for these meetings for particular items, so Standard Operating Procedure 003 was the FPC standard operating procedure that was created specifically around community-oriented policing. There was a desire from the police department to build that out, as well as to create a community-oriented policing plan that delineated how the department was to implement community-oriented policing and specific roles and metrics that the department should collect around community-oriented policing to make sure that that was an idea that was proliferating throughout the department. So Rob mentioned that, the work that we did in this project was really to go to these sessions, hear what was being said, and distill it into a group of themes to display what was really on the minds of residents. That was the first part of this report. The second part was to look at what other cities were doing around community-oriented policing to see what Milwaukee could do more of to ultimately reach those goals of building out the standard operating procedure and creating a plan. So the first area of this research was to summarize those themes. So we, in the report, which I would encourage all of you to read, it's available on our website, we came up with 10 themes that we really heard were prevalent throughout every single one of these community listening sessions, some that turned out just a few residents, others that turned out dozens of residents. So the first set of themes really evolves around the work of policing, the day-to-day ins and outs of the department and how the department interacted with residents of Milwaukee. The first theme would be the scope of policing. In general, what we heard from residents was that there was a desire for more, better, or different service provision. Residents wanted to see police that were responsive, that were meeting their needs and were adapting to the environments and certain issues of public safety that were cropping up. A lot of this focused around budget and the capacity of the department, but overall there was a desire for trust, which also dovetails into the next theme, which is accountability and transparency. Residents wanted a very cohesive relationship with the police department. They wanted accountability, they wanted transparency, they wanted trust, and they wanted communication. But above all, residents expressed a desire to be safe from violent events. I think what many would consider the kind of traditional role of a public safety department. The items that really came up the most are, I think, items that many of you would be familiar with. Reckless driving, firearms, homicide, a lot of the issues that we've seen spikes in, certainly during the pandemic and some of them after the pandemic as well. The second grouping of themes revolves around community. This came up quite a bit. The questions that were asked at these meetings were broader than the specific work of policing. They were really focused around what makes a community safe and what areas of safety do you see or do you not see as part of your community, and how can we get to a place where community is safe? A lot of residents took that to mean community and the ways that community can help make a place safe. So above all, I think the theme that we probably heard the most was the desire for a friendly, neighborly society. You had a lot of residents who have lived in Milwaukee for decades who wanted to go back to a time where they could walk outside and every house they passed, they knew who lived there and they had a relationship with them. Many felt that has changed over time, and that going back to a time where there were those stronger bonds would help to create a safer community. Well-resourced neighborhoods, I think this was broadly everything from basic needs like food, water, shelter, to community needs, community organizations, to health needs, the availability of things like Narcan and therapy, resources for mental health, resources in every sense of the word. Obviously, budgets, money as well came into this. Youth entertainment and recreation, there was a broad concern expressed for the youth in Milwaukee today. A lot of residents very concerned with wanting to make sure that youth have an outlet for entertainment, that youth have schools that they feel safe in and can grow up and learn in, but also opportunities available like mentorship and things to do to grow up and enter society as someone who is complete and can give back to the Milwaukee community. Mental health as well came up quite a bit. I think there was a big focus around this topic when it came to the pandemic and some of the concerns that we were left with coming out of the pandemic. This was also broadly a concern that was expressed on the side of the residents, but also residents were concerned for the mental health of police officers and building those bonds, making sure that both groups' mental health was kept in mind. Our third area of themes was really centered around the environment, the built community, the built environment in Milwaukee. So clean neighborhoods and parks. Residents saw that as a real gateway to a safer community, was to walk streets where there was no trash. They could go to parks and have the resources to be outside in public with their friends and neighbors and feel safe. To that end, lighting and noise was a topic that came up quite a bit. You had residents citing specific instances where a streetlight was out and maybe that area near that streetlight became an area where there was more crime. Noise and noise complaints obviously came up quite a bit as well. And then safe streets, as I mentioned, as part of the safety from violent events theme, reckless driving was a topic that folks are really concerned about. We've seen those numbers spike over the course of the pandemic and in the years coming out of it. Residents really want to live in a community where they can be free of reckless driving incidents and be able to walk their streets and feel safe. There were also a number of items that were mentioned that kind of fall outside the traditional scope of public safety, but certainly are things that folks are concerned about. So things like civic society, lobbying, voting, becoming an involved civic citizen was mentioned quite a bit, as well as a number of other items that fall pretty neatly into other departments within the city of Milwaukee or Milwaukee County. So things like public works, transportation, housing, health, hunger and food, and environmental issues. So themes really ranged quite a bit here. In certain areas of the city, we heard more of one and less of another. But broadly, these were the items that residents were really focused on. So the second part of our report was to take a look at what Milwaukee was already doing when it came to what can be broadly construed as community-oriented policing, and then what other cities are doing, to try to give a sense of, what could the department be doing, or what could the city be doing to help the department to get to a place where a community-oriented policing plan could be built out and implemented as part of departmental policy. So in terms of what MPD already is responsible for, there's quite a bit. There's an extensive list of items that the department already is deploying. I think some that are worth mentioning. So the crisis assessment response team, mental health was a real big focus of these community listening sessions. And the crisis assessment response team is responsible for deploying a mental health professional with a police officer in responding to incidents where mental health is going to be at the center of whatever has occurred. That was piloted just a few years ago, is still being built out, but is a service that broadly falls into this area of community-oriented policing. Programs that are offered by the department, like public safety cadets or their training academy, that allow residents to get to know more what the department policies look like and what it's like to be a police officer in Milwaukee. The Police Athletic League was mentioned quite a bit, especially when it came to youth entertainment and recreation. This was a very built-out program a number of years ago, went away for a while and came back in the middle of this process, and is a really great outlet for children, youth in the city to get to know police officers and members of the police department in a more neutral setting that is focused around recreation, but also things like mentorship and job training. And then neighborhood crime watches, block watches, all of these community-based meeting opportunities for residents in a specific neighborhood to get together to discuss issues around crime. These are all, I think, broadly fall within the community-oriented policing umbrella. And show that MPD, already has quite a bit on the books that it could put into a community-oriented policing plan. It doesn't necessarily need to reinvent the wheel. But we did notice in our scan of a couple dozen of peer cities that there were other initiatives that were worth looking at or worth considering. So these fall into a number of different themes as well. So the first would be service provision to other communities in need. We saw a couple of examples of cities really focusing department personnel in on specific communities that might need a little bit more or could use more attention. So Oklahoma City was a city that we saw had some great examples of this. They have teams dedicated to family services, to seniors, to youth, and a homeless outreach team, which was actually a service that MPD had for a while, a homeless outreach team that no longer is part of the department, but examples where the city is devoting officers to solving a specific issue and just building those relationships in a clearer way. The next would be deployment of volunteers or non-police staff for public safety needs. I think the best example of this we saw was in Kansas City. So Kansas City, like Milwaukee, breaks out their police department into a couple of different districts. They offer for each of their districts, they have a staff social worker who any officer within that police district can, in encountering an instance of crime or an instance where they're called for their service, they can send in a referral to that social worker to follow up with victims or perpetrators afterwards to connect them with any resources they need and listen to what they have to say. We saw that as a really great example of building some of those community police bonds. The next theme that we saw from our community-oriented policing in other cities was victim services and forums. I think the best example of this in Milwaukee right now would be the department's partnership with the Sojourner Truth organization. This is just a forum for the focus on victims and the services that they need. We did see, though, that there were examples in other cities where there was a little bit more done to continue that follow-up, especially around items that we might not think about right off the bat. So in certain instances of crime, there's a lot of paperwork, there's a lot of follow-up conversations that need to happen, and there aren't always the resources available, or the resources available aren't always clear to the victim of a specific crime. So in Burlington, Vermont, there was a really great example of where departmental services were deployed for victims of domestic violence to try to make processing that easier and going through just the process of filing paperwork a little bit easier. So that was an example that we saw that we thought was a good one for MPD to keep in mind as well. Resident-led policymaking. The obvious allegory here is the Fire and Police Commission, but we saw other communities doing really interesting things with their version of the FPC or a similar service. So in El Paso, there are community advisory boards that anyone can join so long as they meet a couple of qualifications. But what we thought made things really interesting in El Paso was that they delineate this by police district. So from police district to police district, even in a place like Milwaukee, there are stark differences. And even within each individual police district, there are differences in the neighborhoods in that police district. So in El Paso, because it's kind of that zoomed in view, the individuals that are part of these community advisory boards have a special knowledge of the area that is being policed, and can really offer a resident's perspective in a place where policymaking happens. And we thought that was an example that MPD could learn a lot from. The collection and use of data, I think we as the forum are really focused around data as a way to move policy forward and implement changes that will be efficacious. And I think that there are a lot of great examples from peer cities. One that we saw quite a bit was Newark. There is a public safety collaborative in Newark between the police department and I believe Rutgers University and a couple of other institutions to just make the job of policing in Newark more effective. A lot of that partnership comes around the collection and use of data. They are able to, on a day-to-day basis, evaluate all of a bunch of pieces of data and determine where resources might be most effectively deployed, what kind of resident leaders the department should be talking to, and we thought that there was a lot to build off of there. Staying in Newark, we thought, we saw creating a safer built environment. This is a theme from the listening sessions, and we saw some great examples of this. One of which was a partnership that the Public Safety Collaborative in Newark had with a public utility company to replace, I believe, 1,500 streetlights with LEDs that are longer lasting, better for the environment, and as you can see from the picture, a lot brighter. They were able to track and find that this significantly reduced instances of crime in the areas where they replaced streetlights. So this is a concern expressed by Milwaukee residents, and we have a clear example of a community partnership that made things better for that city. Our last theme from looking at community-oriented policing in other cities was looking at cities that already had some sort of community-oriented policing plan or community engagement plan, as they're sometimes called. We wanted Milwaukee to be able to go into this process of building theirs out with tangible examples in mind of what that looks like. The two that we found that we thought were most relevant here were from Cleveland and Baltimore, both of which had written theirs within the last couple of years and had a couple of elements that we thought were really important for MPD to pay attention to. One was that within both plans, there was a specific percentage of every officer's time that was meant to be devoted to community-oriented policing efforts. In Cleveland, I believe it was 20%. In Baltimore, it was 40%. So this was a clear metric and a clear, enforcement mechanism for the department to say, this is really going to be a priority, not just of leadership within the department, but of every single member of the department. Another item that was mentioned within both was a clear delineation of what specific job focuses and deployment efforts were to be integrated into community-oriented policing. So for every patrol officer, for every district captain, for the chief, even for administrative staff, there were specific elements that pointed to ways that community-oriented policing could be integrated, as well as in both plans, there were clear directives to take a more district-specific approach and neighborhood-specific approach. So a lot of thematic similarities between the two. So our takeaways from looking at community-oriented policing in other cities was that there were three items that we think MPD could learn a lot from. So the first would be to ways in which it could do more to target neighborhoods and individuals most in need of attention. We mentioned Oklahoma City's teams that were really focusing on specific sections of their community. That would be a great example of zooming in on individuals. Same thing with Burlington and the work that they do around domestic violence victims. And then neighborhoods as well. Kind of throughout, we saw different elements that pointed to how the department could zoom in on neighborhoods and change its approach and not have one area of the city be the policing plan be exactly the same as another part of the city. Another was that data does play a really key role in community-oriented policing in other cities. In both of the community-oriented policing plans in Cleveland and Baltimore, data was a big focus throughout, specific metrics to collect. In Baltimore, there are meetings held with the entire staff that look at metrics and look at ways in which officers should be deployed based on data that they're collecting. The third key takeaway here would be that community-oriented policing requires active participation by community members and participation from all police department personnel. There's really no way to cut corners here. When it comes to community-oriented policing, every member of the public, every resident of the city needs to be involved, and as well as every police department personnel. One of the items that we cited in Milwaukee was that there are community partnership units that constitute about 13 or 14 officers, and there are community liaison officers. There are about 13 or 14 of those as well, so about 25, 26 of those officers in a department where there are 1,600 sworn personnel, so just 1 to 2% of the staff that are really everyday focused on this. In the community-oriented policing plans in other cities, there was a requirement that all personnel be doing at least some element of this and keeping it as part of their job title and job focus. So that was one thing that we saw, was that these things cannot just be shunted off to a specific part of the department. They really need to be kind of imbued throughout. So at the end of our report, like we do with a lot of our reports, we have our policy considerations. We have 6 here. The first 3 are real concrete action items. The second 3 are really focused around things that MPD has started to do, but we think there's always more that can be done. So the first would be to, as I just mentioned, expand community-oriented policing practices to include every sworn and non-sworn member of MPD. This is a clear focus. For a lot of residents, what was mentioned was, I see MPD out and patrolling all the time. I know that you guys have these community liaison officers and they're doing great work, but when I'm pulled over or when I'm the victim of domestic violence, the officer that meets me is not going to be one of those community liaison officers. And so training only specific parts of the department is going to miss a lot of the interactions that happen with residents on a day-to-day basis. So it's really important to deploy community-oriented policing kind of throughout. Increasing data collection and sharing, we think there's a lot that the department can do, both to reorganize personnel, reorganize the day-to-day focuses of the department, but also to ensure that those community public safety bonds are being created. And then taking a more active role on social media and organizing the MPD websites in a way that's more user-friendly. We discovered throughout this process that there are 4 or 5 different websites that the police department maintains on a regular basis. Some deal with community engagement, some deal with traffic safety. One is hosted by the city, but they're all for different purposes. And for a resident who is not tapped into the work that MPD does every day, it can be kind of confusing to know where to go next or where to find specific pieces of information. Another item that came up quite a bit, I mentioned earlier that one of our themes here was a friendly neighborly society. That was really something that was mentioned by residents. For a lot of residents, that society is created online. A lot of residents, as the internet has evolved, find their communities online. And we found that there was a real gap here that MPD could help to fill in terms of growing their social presence, not just in the physical community, but online as well, and making sure that their resources are available online. That was particularly important when it came to youth, which was another focus of our themes. A lot of youth communities are already built online, so that was something that we saw as fairly important. For things for MPD to continue, a lot of this they've started to do, but is recent within the last couple of years, and we would just encourage them to continue moving forward. So to continue studying the ways in which MPD could take a more neighborhood-specific approach to patrolling and to community-oriented policing. We saw, for example, in El Paso, where the community advisory boards were district-specific. In Kansas City, where social workers, there was a social worker for each police district. The needs of each police district are different. Even within the police district, there are neighborhoods that are very different. The police districts in Milwaukee constitute anywhere from 50 to 100,000 individuals, and individuals from distinctly different backgrounds, income levels, racial and ethnic backgrounds. So continuing to figure out the ways in which that those different communities can be addressed and catered to, not just one specific slice of Milwaukee's residents, but all, is very important. Continuing to build out the assets the department offers, particularly in the area of youth engagement. by collaborating with existing community organizations. We recognize that the department is obviously functioning with limited resources, as are all public organizations. They're limited by the amount of tax revenue they can collect, staff salaries and benefits. But youth was a real focus of these meetings, and there was a real need expressed by residents to continue to focus on youth. A lot of that, gaps were seen when it came to mentorship programs, employment and job opportunities, especially for older youth. And that was a real need expressed kind of across these meetings. So trying to figure out the ways in which this can happen is not necessarily going to just be consuming departmental resources, but by tapping into the vast nonprofit and service provision network that exists in Milwaukee, bringing those community groups together and perhaps using the police department in certain areas as kind of the hub for a lot of them. And then our final policy consideration would just be to continue to develop strong working relationships with relevant city agencies to solve problems that detract from public safety. I mentioned when it came to themes, there were so many themes that were expressed by residents that there is clearly another city agency or county agency that is going to be responsible for. It is imperative, we think, that MPD build those bonds and make sure that even if they are the point of first contact for certain residents, they have those partnerships where they're able to reach out to the Department of Neighborhood Services or the Department of Public Works and get things like streetlights solved, or make sure that the city leaders are cognizant of the housing issues that exist that were expressed by many residents, trash and litter and all of that. There's quite a bit that was expressed that the police might be the point of first contact, but there's going to be another city agency that is adept at addressing those issues. So those are our policy considerations, and that is where I'll leave things for right now. Thank you for having me, and I'd love to take any questions.
Thank you, Ari. If you have a question for Ari, you can use this microphone here, and as always, please keep your questions concise and topical.
Thank you very much for your presentation. One of the most controversial aspects of Milwaukee's shared revenue deal with the state was the mandatory return of police into MPS. And I'm curious if you can speak a little bit about where you see that in terms of community-oriented policing, and whether you also have data that would suggest that that is a reasonable or necessary move.
So to weigh in on this without weighing in on some of the more controversial elements, I think this was something that you saw expressed by a lot of community residents. There are obviously different opinions on this. There were residents that wanted to see, school resource officers see those numbers grow. There were some that wanted to see those numbers shrink. But I think that the theme of the needs for youth to have those resources available to them, to have resources in general available to them, came up quite a bit. I can't weigh in on efficacy or necessarily the implementation. It's going to be something that we're going to watch progress. We're at the very beginning of Act 12 and what that looks like. But school resource officers and the topic of MPD in schools did come up quite a bit. And I think that it's certainly worth the department and city leaders, paying attention to this issue as it evolves over time and trying to find those partnerships that are the most beneficial and solve the goals of, making sure youth have access to mentorship and entertainment, recreation opportunities.
How are you doing? What discussion, if any, is held of the animals that are out there, either held by the community, like vicious dogs, or the Humane Society should interview in the animals that are not being taken care of? There are police dogs, police drug-sniffing dogs. And then, selfishly for Rotary, we funded the stables where the horses for crowd control and for teaching and for youth. What discussion of animals pro-con was held at all?
I'm glad you mentioned the horses. One of the meetings, these community listening sessions, was actually held at the stables. So that was a real, opportunity that the police department and residents saw to build those partnerships and kind of meet each other in a setting where Everyone was enjoying themselves. I think that that's something that, mental health was a topic that came up quite a bit. From a departmental perspective, I think that you saw that was really the next place that they could go when it came to the animals that they have. I don't know if the, vicious dogs and things like that came up quite a bit during the listening sessions, but certainly deploying departmental resources for the purpose of boosting mental health. I think that we saw a lot of conversation of that, and the assets that the department has are being used in that way.
Thank you. Youth engagement, you mentioned that, and you talked about other cities and their plans. Were there any examples of successful programs that engaged both police and youth?
Yeah, this is a great question. So I think that if you go in our report, you'll see there's an appendix at the end where we try to just document every single initiative that the department already has on its books around community-oriented policing and community engagement. And I think one of the things that you'll see is MPD itself already, even if it's just once a year, there are already a lot of programs that the department does have. I think things like block parties, street fairs, even where not necessarily MPD is hosting, but they're present at the event. Those are really looked at as an effective way to do not only engagement with youth, but engagement with families and folks who are tied to Milwaukee. As for specific instances of youth engagement in other cities, I think the venue that is generally talked about the most, and the timing was really interesting, was the Police Athletic League. That's obviously an asset that's offered with recreation in mind, but part of the Police Athletic League traditionally has been mentorship for older youth, job training and employment opportunities. And so I think that, as that comes back in Milwaukee, finding ways to build that out and offer services through that program as a start is what we're seeing in a lot of peer cities, and is a way that Milwaukee could start to build those things out.
Thanks for coming today. I know some of these initiatives are new, and you mentioned that we have opportunities. One of the opportunities to focus on is increasing data collection, but I'm curious, do we know if any of these initiatives are effective? How are we measuring that? And can you maybe compare Milwaukee with any peer cities and how we're progressing in this area?
I'm so glad you asked, because this is, at the forum, this is one of our biggest focuses is, data collection is great and we think it's really important, but it should be done in service of determining what is effective and continuing to fund programs that are effective and pulling funding away from programs that are not effective. And the answer that I have, frankly, right now is we don't have a lot of data. And that is something, when we say, as a policy consideration, increase data collection, that is the end to which we're referring, is collecting data in service of determining what works and what doesn't, and what programs should be continued. Yeah.
Thanks. Could you just say in general what the response of the police department is to the report?
Yeah, we worked very closely with the police department on this report. So the groups that were responsible for putting on these listening sessions were the Milwaukee Police Department, the Fire and Police Commission, and the Community Collaborative Commission, which was formed as kind of a quasi-public group of individuals who was focused around police reform and implementation of police reform. I think that the department's focus right now, after, of course, getting through the RNC this summer, is going to be on developing a community-oriented policing plan that is really effective. There's obviously been a lot of turnover at the top of the police department over the last couple of years. So I think that now that we've had a chief who's been there for a number of years and who was an active and happy participant in this process, building that out, and I'll say FPC as well. Both organizations are really, both agencies are really wanting to continue this work. I think on our end, we are looking to see that plan as soon as it's available. But I think the response generally has been quite positive, and recognizing that this should be a win-win for everyone involved.
Hi, nice job, and thank you for your work, first off. Second, is there a cost to implementing community-oriented policing, or can it be done in a budget-neutral way? And the reason I ask is the city already spends about 50% of its general revenue on police funding, which probably makes it the highest just about in the entire country. So the cost consideration is something that is real.
Yes, absolutely. The cost consideration is very real, and I think that what you'll hear when we go and present this report and we talk about it with the police department is, all of these things that we want to do and you want to do, they do have costs. I think that there's such a range of opportunities here from, reorganizing what already exists within the department, changing what the day-to-day looks like in a way that not only could keep costs the same, but potentially save costs. Looking at ways that current resources could be used more effectively, all the way up to the department expending more resources. I think one of the things that we tried to do here, without weighing in on what is the correct level or amount of resources that should be spent on community-oriented policing, is try to recognize some of those synergies. So one of our recommendations is to continue to build the bonds between the police department and other city and county agencies. Another is to continue to build the bonds between the department and the community organizations that already exist. There are folks that are doing so much of this work already, and we think that a lot of it can be accomplished just by the department shoring up some of those relationships and utilizing and building on the partnerships that already exist. So it's hard to say without knowing exactly what initiatives they're going to move forward with and what is going to stick as part of this report. But there's a range here.
Yes, thank you, Ari. What has been the impact of the community policing, community organization policing on a police department's law enforcement capabilities? Has it aided them, or has it spread them too thin to do their basic function of law enforcement?
Yeah, great question. I think that what you probably find in, I haven't seen a kind of widespread evaluation, but I think what you generally find across different cities is this isn't necessarily, it shouldn't be two separate initiatives. Community-oriented policing is really meant to tackle the roots of the issues of a lot of elements of public safety, by kind of addressing things before they get to, escalated to the point of a crime taking place. So I think that, for example, doing things like having social workers deployed within the department to be used to connect with victims of crime or even perpetrators of crime to make sure that there is no recidivism there. That's a great example of a way to help public safety without, taking resources away from the community-oriented policing side of things. Having a specific departmental or district-based initiatives and targeting your resources effectively through the use of data. All of this is meant to ultimately lead to a city that is safer. And so I think that they don't necessarily need to operate parallel to each other. They can intersect in a lot of important ways. And I think that then in general you would find, this is community-oriented policing is a term that has been used federally since 1995 and is well known at the federal level. And as it has kind of been deployed in cities, the focus here, just like the traditional focus of law enforcement, has been to cut down on crime and create safer communities.
When I look at the term community and think beyond just the city of Milwaukee, your data that you collected was from other troubled cities and city by city. What data did you collect from adjacent cities in the community of Milwaukee? if we look at the retail crime, you know, City of Milwaukee doesn't have malls anymore, but Wauwatosa has one, Glendale has one. Our technical college shares among other cities that again have to cooperate, and the community being broader and the success being broader, seems to me that there'd be some data to be shared with, whether it's, you know, it is Glendale, Whitefish Bay, Shorewood, West Allis, Wauwatosa, whatever. How is that figure into, I know it's not part of the mandate or the settlement, how does that figure into the real problem and the solution?
Great question. Yeah, I think you'll find, you know, in the work of the forum, one of the items that comes up the most is the idea that we are a state not just of individual municipalities, individual counties. There are regional issues, and I think that public safety is a great example of this. What happens in Wauwatosa, in Glendale, in Brown Deer, in Oak Creek, like all of these things matter for Milwaukee, and what happens in Milwaukee matters for all of them. And so I think that, you know, sometimes Milwaukee is kind of out in front when it comes to the discussion of some of these things, but there is no way of getting around the idea that creating a safer community is not just a Milwaukee specific item. So I think that when it comes to our recommendations, the impetus to connect the department with other city agencies, the department with community organizations, I think another, you know, in that vein, another item that can be thought of is connecting the department with other departments to make things truly regional, and to make sure that the, you know, departments are not siloed off, but there are open lines of communication between chiefs, but even between patrol members to inform and keep things moving forward.
Police are often criticized with the use of deadly force, which typically is applied against criminals who also are using guns. What did your study reveal on the use of deadly force?
Yeah, people are really concerned about, and when I say people, I mean residents and the police department personnel are really concerned about the prevalence of firearms. I think that is, you know, the groups of individuals that turned out at these meetings, a lot of them were folks who have lived in Milwaukee their entire lives. And from those individuals, one of the things that we heard was, you know, the issue of firearms is making our community less safe, and we've noticed that cropping up more and more recently. And that's a focus of the department as well. I think one of the things that they would say is it makes it harder for us to do our jobs. And so it's a clear concern of residents. I think that, you know, in terms of solutions, you know, a lot of people are focused on, you know, whatever works, and same, I should mention, with reckless driving, was a real big topic of concern. I think there are other areas where residents are pretty cognizant that there are a couple fixes that can be made, and you know, things might change, but firearms and reckless driving were the two that I think we heard. This is a 2-year time span where a lot happened, and from the beginning to the end, I think those are the two that we heard the most. So just to say that it is a focus of residents and it is a focus of the department, and in terms of solutions to issues of violent crime, those are the areas that are being focused on right now.
Thank you, Ari.